If you're in the process and you know you want to be published and you know you want to get the agent or whatever path you choose, everything you're going through right now is purposeful. All the no's and the rejections and the revisions and the edits, that is helping you develop the strength you're going to need for a career in this.
Welcome to the podcast, Tapping Creativity, with myself, Matthew C. Temple. And each week, we're going to dive into questions and issues and inspiration around creativity and the creative process. Welcome to today's episode. Super excited to have our distinguished guest today, Melissa Payne, author and novelist. Her book, The Night of Many Endings, came out yesterday, and I've got to say, it was absolutely a lovely read. I even have my little flags to make sure that I highlight the places that particularly excited me or that I wanted to come back to. But Melissa, as I mentioned, this is not her first book. She's written a couple of other books. But one of the things that also struck me about Melissa's story, and I'm just going to read this. She first learned the real importance of storytelling when she worked for a residential and day treatment center for abused and neglected children. There, she wrote speeches and letters to raise funds for the children. The truth in those stories was piercing and painful and written to invoke a call to action in the reader, to give, to help, to make a difference. And that love for storytelling endured and has now really become infused in the narrative work that she works on. So first of all, Melissa, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
And secondly, that particular thing that I just read, I really want to sort of hear, how does that infuse your writing now as a novelist?
Well, this letters that I wrote to fundraise, they were letters, or it would be a tour that I would be giving. But you have to, for people to understand why they would want to donate their money somewhere, they have to understand what it affects. And so you have to take the stories of these kids, which are painful, and make them relatable to this person who has never experienced something like this. It was hard to do because these kids were so amazing. They were courageous. They were brave. They could persevere, but they were also hurting. And so to be able to get that through, you have to create a story that allows somebody in. And this was much the premise of this book, which was we don't really know a person until we learn their story. Right. And I think that can apply to all of us. In all stages of life, in all walks of life, we go off of assumptions. And of course we do. We're busy. Our days are busy. But sometimes you need to just kind of slow down and take a moment to ask questions and listen.
Right. So take the time to ask questions and listen. First of all, it's a great insight and wisdom for life in general. But I'm curious, how do you sort of see that as a part of your creative process? Sometimes we think, oh, I'm an artist, I have to go out, I've got to create, or I'm a writer, I've got to sit down, I've got to, hit my word count every day, or I've got to do these things of output. But then how does this listening, this asking questions, how do you use that in your creative process?
Yeah. And you know what, you just said the word create, and I have to use this to create. Honestly, I think that it's osmosis. You go and you sit and you interact and you meet and you listen to people. Because characters, I guess, unless I was writing sci-fi, but still you're going to have a journey of some sort. But characters aren't just people I'm creating. They are coming from my own observations and people that I've met along the way. So it really is a process of capturing what we observe as writers and putting that into then this fictional character. But much of what I love is I love reality and I love real people. And I love putting real people into fictional situations and creating fictional characters, but based off of what is real. Because I think there's such beauty in the messiness of life and what's actually all around us that it's not too much of a leap to put that into a story or to create a story around it. But I love trying to uncover what's so beautiful about what maybe it doesn't look so pretty all the time.
Right. Nice. Before I ask you where the inspiration for this came from, tell the audience a little bit about The Night of Many Endings, where it came from. What was the inspiration?
A lot of places, actually. I'm a big podcast listener, love podcasts, love radio. And so it came from a number of places, and I'll focus on one because the other one, it'll take too long. I was listening to a TED Talk, And it was a librarian whose parents had both been addicts at one point. And as we know, our libraries aren't just places of curated knowledge and information and technology, but they're also places that see firsthand what opioid addiction has done to so many people and communities. And so librarians often have become like a first line of defense there. Well, she saw what was happening in her library, and because of her parents' background, went and got trained to use Narcan, which reverses an opioid addiction.
Real quick, it reverses opioid overdose or?
Overdose.
Okay.
Overdose. Did I say addiction?
Yeah, I just want to make sure. Okay.
Misspoke. It reverses an opioid, an overdose.
Okay.
So she had to use that. And she had people ask her why. When you know that might happen again to that same person, why? And she said, because somebody did it for my parents. And it was the last chance that they had, and they used it and they got better. And I want to be that for somebody else. That blew me away and was incredibly powerful. And that I heard a year or so before this story developed, but it was something I knew was important enough that I wanted to somehow put that into a story. I wanted that thread in a story. And so that was one of the inspirations, definitely an inspiration for the character Nora.
Nice. In that sense, I'm curious, because two-part question. Why did you write this book in the first place? There are all sorts of other things you could be doing with your time, and yet you chose to write a book, and you decided to put yourself through the grueling effort of taking something that didn't exist before and going through some of that doubt and all those pieces that I know have to show up for you unless you're a unicorn. I mean, you probably could be a unicorn anyways, but even so. But like, it's such a challenge. There's this question that it's been fascinating to me lately. Like, why do you do this? But also, like, why did you write this story?
It's funny. I was at a writers' conference this last weekend, and there were some, people aspiring to publish one day. And this woman asked me, so I was just in this last workshop and it was pretty depressing because this writer was saying how difficult everything was and it wasn't really worth your time and on and on and on. Do you feel that way? She asked me. And I said, no, not at all. But it is a difficult field to get into because everything you go through publishing and beyond is challenging, might make you doubt yourself, but it's worth it. And it's how you develop your chops. Mm-hmm. So this is the writing podcast, right? Or
yeah.
writing.
General creativity podcast. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you're in the process and you want to be published and you want to get the agent or whatever path you choose, everything you're going through right now is purposeful. All the no's and the rejections and the revisions and the edits, that is helping you develop the strength you're going to need for a career in this. So when you ask why write? Well, I think those of us who want to do it, it's just something you can't say no to. You want to, creating is just so fun. I'm in the process of writing my next book and I love being here. Yeah. It's like dating for the first time. My characters are shiny. No one's told me they're not good yet. They're just mine.
Right.
So you get those little pieces of time where you just get to enjoy where you are.
Got it. So you're saying,
and I guess it keeps you going.
So you're saying that writing a novel is kind of like a relationship and you're going to go through the challenges and you're going to go through that. Why am I with this person? Why am I with this book? Did I make a mistake? Am I wasting my time? And then eventually you keep going through and you're like, oh, you know what? When I actually engage and I keep, taking responsibility for whatever I have, this mess that I've created, I can actually make something beautiful.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice. So why this, you mentioned the inspiration. So maybe instead of not even like why this book, but like, who did you write this book for?
Well, I think I always start out writing a book for me. I write a book I would read. Okay. So I don't often think about, I don't have grand ideas of, this book will reach so many people, but I write it for me and what I would want to read and what would touch me, what would affect me as a reader. And then that grows, obviously, because I'm not writing me into this book. I'm writing characters who I have to get to know and I don't always like. In this book, I didn't particularly like one of my characters. I didn't care for the things that she said to the others. I didn't care for her thoughts at times. But the point of this writing was to get to dig down on that character and find out why. Why did she come to this point in time with these types of opinions and her own issues? And then I learned to like her. Right. I learned what was likable about her.
Yeah.
And I think through that, and then of course, obviously I want other people to read this book.
Yeah.
I would like to share my writing with others. It's not just for me. But I think that's probably where I start out is what would I like to read? What interests me?
One of the things I kind of got like halfway through, and I read a lot, and I had this kind of interesting experience because usually I choose the books that I read in that I say, is this something that is like in line with whatever I'm thinking about or stories I'm interested in particular? And when this opportunity came through, it was actually that little piece that I read right at the beginning that inspired me to say, you know what, I really want to have Melissa on this show. But it had nothing to do with this part about of understanding this piece about story and actually awakening action in somebody, right? Because in some ways, the best way for us to live the best way for us to live, to go to gazillion places is by not going anywhere, by taking an extra, by taking an extra hour of our day in the morning with their cup of coffee and reading a book. You can do a whole lot more in your life than if you actually tried to cram things outside of your home. I'm a big traveler and adventurer, so I'm not saying not to do that. But I guess what I'm kind of getting to is I got about halfway through this book and I was like, I'm 44 years old, so I'm a filmmaker. I live in Northern California. I have, 4 grown children, and I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, this book wasn't actually written for me. And that's not to say I didn't really enjoy reading the book and appreciate it, but it's a book I never would have chosen to read. And that was kind of interesting for me to read a book that I wouldn't have chosen, but yet I read it anyway. So maybe it was kind of like being in high school again or something. I don't know. Like, I don't want to, when is this book? I really need to read it. And you're like, oh, actually that's a really lovely book. So that's a little bit where this question was coming from, is like, when you see an audience, when they're reading this, who's going to be awakened by it? Is it kind of everybody, or did you have an idea? Because to me, in some ways, I felt when I got about halfway through and we get to know this character, Jasmine, I was like, I kind of felt in some ways like the book was written for Jasmine. But that's why I was wondering.
I think I am open for readers to take away what they want from stories. This one was very specifically about perceptions and stereotypes. And, I think a reader would go into this and maybe understand some characters over another, maybe have assumptions about other characters, just like the characters had of each other. Mm-hmm. And it would be interesting to me to see, how did you change it all in your perception of people or these people? How have you experienced things like this in your own life? As far as who it's written for, I think books find readers. And so unless you're forced to, people know what they like to read and what speaks to them as a reader. And I'm not someone who makes these grand, I hope, I guess I just don't think about it. I guess I hope that whoever picks it up and reads it will connect with it in the way that, whatever way works best for them.
Right. Nice.
I'm okay for the universe of readers to not all want to read the book, but I do hope it finds itself in the right hands.
Awesome. So kind of just to shift a little bit, when people embark on a creative journey, or even when people are, I'm a filmmaker by trade, and I can say that the life of a filmmaker, it can be, first of all, every person has their own experience as an artist. There are the documentarians of the world. And, I spent 3 years working on a documentary, and I thought, I'm just going to bust this thing out. I'm going to go film this summer, and I'm going to have a story, and I'm going to make a movie. And then it turned out it needed another year of filming, and then it needed an extra year of other stuff. So it's always this kind of like this perceptions of what it can be like, and also some of the illusion or fantasy of what life is like as a filmmaker. Or in this case, my question for you is like, what's the life of a novelist really like? Or in your... It's
not glamorous. There's nothing glamorous. People do have very romantic visions of writers and authors, and some authors might live that world. But the most working authors, you've got a family, you've got obligations. You probably have another job. You write in your pajamas. You shower as needed if there's a deadline. It's not always pretty, and it's not necessarily romantic. The romantic piece of it is the creative piece. When I think most writers and creatives can relate. there's just something about being able to sit with characters or a story, or you do documentaries, like how do you tell that story? That is exciting, and it fuels everything else. So all the not so fun pieces or doesn't look so great, it doesn't matter, because you get to put out something that somebody might really enjoy or might teach someone something.
Yeah. Nice.
I'm a big fan of documentaries, by the way.
Oh, good. I'll send you a link to Hardball, The Girls of Summer. Yeah, it's about a few women who play baseball in America. And, kind of going at it to play.
Is there any crying in it?
There is no crying in baseball.
That's the right answer.
Very good. Boom. Very nice. I'm curious. So then what is your process like?
That has evolved with each book. In this world, there's the plotters and the pantsers, which I learned about as I got into this world.
Say that
and
again?
I guess I'm a hybrid, a plotter or a pantser, someone who plots their stories or plots, outlines, pretty little different colored index cards, that kind of stuff, or somebody who just kind of writes by the seat of their pants. Okay. That's where that comes from.
Got it.
I'm a hybrid model of that. And so my process really does evolve with each book. And each book has, to me, its own way of developing, whether it started from something I listened to, or it started from an interaction or a place I went to. It really is its own beast. So this book I wrote during the pandemic, and that was very isolating. That was difficult in a lot of ways, because I need to be around people. I also like to be moving and out. And even if that's just writing in the middle of a train station, like I get a lot from that. So that was hard. And it forced me to be creative in a different way, and to force a little bit of creativity at times, maybe, but it was a good process to go through. And I think I learned something from it.
Interesting. You just also said about this kind of isolating at the end in your acknowledgements. And a lot of times I just take a quick glance at the acknowledgements, and I usually read the very beginning of it. And then I'm like, okay, whatever. There are all these names of people that I don't really know and I don't care about.
You don't know them.
Yeah. So like, whatever. I mean, it's nice. I know why acknowledgements are there. They're absolutely necessary. They're just not necessarily there for me. They're there for the people who are being acknowledged. But you say right at the beginning, so much work and effort goes into writing a book, and not just for the writer. It's a team effort. And with each book, my gratitude for the team grows deeper. I believe there's a bit of a perception or perhaps misconception with that writing is just this thing that you do totally on your own. And obviously you have to come up with the characters. You have to sit down for hours a day, or at least hours every week, and put words on a page, and there's nobody else there. But there's no such thing as art that's a solo endeavor in a vacuum. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, so I get to write this whole thing all on my own, right? I write it. I do have critique groups that I'm a part of, but at some point you're alone with your thoughts and your story, and you're kind of questioning yourself the whole way. Is this right? Is this the correct way to tell this story? But you get it down on paper. The team part comes into play when you go through revisions and edits. A lot of writers get really scared about that process. They think, oh, my dream or my story will be twisted by other people. And that's not how I've ever seen it. It's actually where the real work is. And it's a little gritty and it's a little ugly, but it's where you learn writing. And I think it's like sometimes the most creative piece. I'm not just, it's hard to get a whole book down. But once you get into the revisions of going deeper, that's kind of the fun part and miserable part. It's all the same. It's two sides of the same coin, but you got to learn to love it, and know that it is one of those things that will make you a better writer. And this career, this creative piece, I love it because I'm always going to be able to become better. Yeah. It's not like I'll ever reach a point where I will have written the last book I'll ever write because it's so perfect. No, I always get to try to write a better story.
I think it's Leonardo da Vinci who was credited with saying art is never finished, only abandoned. Does that resonate at all in your process of writing books?
You could revise a book until you never publish it ever. There's always something you could have done better. And I've had to learn as a writer when it's time to just move on. When it's time to let it be what it is and let it go out as a little baby into the world. I mean, you do have to walk away, because I don't think stories are about being perfect. I think they should be well told and well developed and edited well, but I don't think it has to be so perfect, because I think that limits how many stories we're able to tell if we're, chewing on something for too long. And I think it's Stephen King who said something about that, about, oh, he could go back and rewrite, but it's not about that. I mean, you do have to just move forward.
Right. In relation to that, when I made my very first film back in 2003 or 2004, I'm writing the script and I'm imagining winning an Oscar. And probably every movie that I've ever made at some point, I haven't written an Oscar speech for every movie that I've made, but definitely for more than one. I have never won an Oscar. I haven't been nominated I just haven't gotten close. But does that ever, is it like when you're writing, do you ever kind of have these moments where you're sitting there and just like imagining winning some kind of book award or being on the New York Times bestseller list or anything like that?
Of course. Because every book, when it's in the stage right now, my next book comes out in November of 2022. So this stage is my favorite stage because nobody can tell me anything's wrong with it. And my characters are shiny and they're so nice and they're playing nicely with each other and I like them. And so right now it's a bestseller. This is the stage where it gets to be a bestseller. Right. So this is where I'm like, oh, what am I going to, bestseller, another one. And yeah, that's what you tell yourself, but you got to tell yourself things to get through. And that's okay. I think those little lies to ourselves are okay because one day it might become truth. Right. Right. And so it's okay. I think that's a great thing to tell yourself. If you want to give your speech now, you're welcome to. We could listen to one of them.
That's a great question. I would have to go back, but I can tell you the gist of it. And I think that maybe that's also part of why I resonated with your acknowledgement was that in movies, obviously a little bit different from books. You're as an author, you carried the burden and the work, and the other people who come through, they're vital in the process, but it's not their creation. And I feel like in filmmaking, it's still, there's a similarity, but the writer is also not the director. That's two people who have put their heart and soul into it. And then the actors always bring something, and then the producers always have something to bring. And then you've got a cinematographer, and you've got, it's so many people. And I think that really, when it came down to my last Oscar speech anyways, was definitely about that appreciation of the collaboration. And like I said, I understand completely in a book, it's different, but I think it was Elizabeth Warren who kind of got some flack a few years ago for saying, or maybe it was Barack Obama. One of them said, like, nobody in America did it on their own. Like somebody built roads, somebody built the building, somebody put in the cables, somebody else's tax money at one point built those cables in the schools that you got to go to. And I just think that that's a really important, that's just an important piece. And it's something that kind of also fires me up. And I was talking to Propaganda, the hip hop artist, at one point, and he said, when I collaborate with other people, like, I just want to find somebody who's really good. So that way I don't have to even like tell them what I want. I trust them so much that what they bring to the table, I know will be welcomed.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, that would have been a great speech.
All right. Well, when I'm nominated for an Oscar, or when I win my Oscar, I'll make sure to give you. I'll make sure to give you a call. If I've got extra tickets, I'll send you an invite.
Absolutely. I have something other than pajama pants.
Okay. I'm curious. Is there a passage in the book that really is like a nice little piece to share? Do you have something that you could, like a page you could turn to give us a little insight, or shall I pick one?
I left my book in the other room. Actually, I could probably find it on my computer. Is that okay to do?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is a piece when they've been in the library for a little bit, and Nora notices that Lewis's feet, like he's been stumbling, and she has had a brother who's been homeless and is an addict. And so she recognizes the symptoms, and she's worried about his feet. She's worried something has happened to them, very similar to her brother, who ended up with something like trench foot. And so she's just worried because he was out in the snow and he's all wet. And so she's trying to tend to him.
Okay.
Nora shot from her chair and knelt in front of him, where the stench of moist clothes and unwashed human permeated the air. She ignored it. Lewis, what's wrong with your foot? I'm fine. Leave it alone. I think we need to take your shoes off and see. She touched the toe of his boot, and beneath her finger the leather was squishy. Your socks must be soaking. It's not good for your skin. Come on, Lewis, Marlene said, without a hint of gentleness. Take off your shoes. Old man feet are bad no matter who you are. My father had the thickest, yellowest toenails I've ever seen. Yours can't be any worse. Nora wanted to pinch Marlene hard, but Lewis grunted a laugh. Lady, you're too much. And with effort, he slid his shoes off, then his socks, exposing his pale, wrinkled feet, which looked like they'd been soaking in water too long. On his right heel and toe were small white blisters. A few popped open, and an angry red. Nora grabbed the antibiotic ointment from before and dabbed some on the blisters. You need to dry your feet out, Lewis, she said. But it's so cold, Jasmine said. His feet will freeze, won't they? Lewis started to put his shoes back on. She's right. It's warmer in my shoes. Your shoes and socks are causing the problem, Lewis. How do you know? There was defensiveness in the glint of his eyes, and Nora imagined how he must feel with his damaged feet on display, glowing like little white fishes in the lantern light. My brother had something similar. His was much worse. Lewis didn't say anything, but he put his shoes down and left his feet bare. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
But that, I think, just gives a little bit of a piece of what was happening as they were starting to kind of let their barriers down with one another and see each other. And that particular little snippet doesn't show how Marlene and Lewis started to really understand one another in different ways. But she ends up giving him a blanket that he wants to refuse because she was holding it. She was around her arms, and she said, no, you take it. And so that was just, I like that interaction between the three of them because it's one of the first times where they're kind of moving forward together.
And I'll say one of the things, I'm glad you chose that, because one of the things you said, you don't see how that relationship begins to shift. But one of the things that I noticed, particularly between Marlene, who is kind of maybe a more acrimonious character in the book, actually how it's almost as though her words don't change throughout the book as much as her intention behind it, right? And I thought that was a really nice touch with that character, because, what we say is one thing, but even more importantly is how we say it. And I thought you did a really nice job with her.
Thank you. And that was very intentional with Marlene, because you want somebody to change, but no one changes completely overnight, especially if it's a way they have been behaving or talking for decades. But if you can change that, like you said, that intention behind that, oftentimes other things follow. But is Marlene's shift, or should be, that bit of intention shifting. Right.
And I think it's one of the things that I love also about the format of a novel is that kind of process of that we get to kind of hear, and Marlene's not the main character, but I did like this character, in part because of the shift from like, I know what I know, to in her thinking like, oh, I could possibly express this differently, but then it just comes out the same old way. And so there was something that was really authentically human in her development.
Thank you.
So there was one little piece. I don't know if this is sort of a theme in the book in some ways, but I think it might be. I'm kind of like reading through, and I get to page 99, and this is Nora speaking, who's the librarian. And if I remember correctly, this is sort of about like why she's doing what she's doing. Nora says, "It sounds silly, I know, but it spoke to me. And later, when some things changed, she hesitated, not willing to talk about Mario, her brother, or how he fell apart a few months after their road trip in a way that left her breathless, scrambling for answers and all alone. It just helped me to see my situation at the time in a different light. I guess what I'm saying," here she focused solely on Jasmine, "well, it's what books have the power to do, speak to the reader. And this one spoke to me." And she's talking about a book or manuscript. Is that kind of like the theme of the book? Is that, or did I just pick something randomly?
No, you didn't. No, that's her story. She's referencing something from this library where this very real life library based on a fictional library that accepts all manuscripts. So it's like a home for all manuscripts. And I love that idea of a place where all writings would have a home, because sometimes people just write from their soul and they don't need it published, but they want somebody to get something from it. And I think that's powerful. And so she is talking about that, but absolutely. And I think when I write, I am hoping that it speaks to somebody eventually, right? It speaks to me first because I'm the one who's developing it. But I do, when it goes out there, I hope it speaks to somebody. When I read, I'm looking for a book to make me see something different or experience a different life, a new perspective, a different character I've never thought of before. I want it to speak to me. I don't read books to just, flip pages. I want to learn something, or I want to learn something about myself through it. So yeah, I would say that's a theme of the book and in general, just in writing.
Right. Amazing. Well, I just have to say thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, Tapping Creativity. It's been just a real gift to speak with you, a real gift that you wrote this book that I got to read. And to all listeners, The Night of Many Endings is out now. It's available on Kindle. It's available if you like a real hard covered book that you can actually hold and use a light at night when your wife is sleeping. If you like that instead of Kindle, you can do that. I did both, I'll admit. Highly recommended. Beautiful book, lovely author, and really excited to have you on the show. Thank you for sharing your insight, your wisdom, your process with us. It's been fantastic. Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you. This was really fun. I appreciate the conversation and the topic, and thank you. I'm going to start writing my acceptance speech now too.